Poor human saved an orc woman, in the ice, unaware she was the queen. There are exactly 3 types of stupid decisions a man can make in the northern wastes. The first is going out during a winter storm. The second is helping someone your people have been at war with for 3 centuries. The third is doing both at the same time. Cormac made all 3. The storm had arrived like an angry god, the kind that didn't just bring snow, but brought the type of cold that made your bones ache from the inside out, the kind where breathing felt like swallowing knives. Cormac had seen 42 winters in these woods, and this was the worst. The wind didn't howl, it screamed. He should have stayed inside, should have kept his fire burning, his door barred, and his survival instincts functioning. But old Hildy had mentioned 3 days ago that she'd seen tracks, big ones, heading toward the frozen lake, and Cormac had the unfortunate curse of being the type of fool who investigated things that were none of his business. The lake was a mirror of white when he found her. Not because of fresh snow, but because of ice. Thick, unforgiving ice that had probably been forming for weeks. And there, half submerged in a section where the ice had cracked and refrozen, was something that made his heart stop. Green skin. That was the first thing he noticed. Not pale white like a frozen corpse should be, but green. Vivid, impossible green, like spring grass in the middle of winter's grave. An orc. She was trapped in the ice from the waist down, her upper body slumped forward like someone who had given up fighting. Her black hair hung in frozen sheets around her face. She wore armor, proper armor, not the crude leather he'd heard orcs used. This was crafted, detailed, with engravings that caught what little light filtered through the storm. Her lips were blue-gray. Her eyes were closed. She was dying, or already dead. Every reasonable part of Cormac's brain screamed at him to turn around. Orcs killed humans. Humans killed orcs. That was the way it had been since before his grandfather's time. The war wasn't active anymore. More of a cold hatred that everyone accepted as normal. But it was still there, thick as the ice beneath his feet. He took 3 steps backward, turned, started walking away, made it 7 steps before he stopped. The problem with being raised by a woman like his mother was that she'd beaten certain ideas into his head, with the same persistence she'd used to teach him to chop wood correctly. And one of those ideas was simple. You don't let people die when you can stop it. Not even your enemies. Especially not when they're helpless. Damn it, he muttered. His breath came out in white clouds that vanished instantly in the wind. Damn it, damn it, damn it! He turned back. Getting her out of the ice took an axe, 2 knives, and roughly an hour of work that left his hands bloody and numb. The ice didn't want to give her up. When he finally pulled her free, she was heavier than any person had a right to be. Pure muscle under that armor. He'd heard orcs were strong. This one looked like she could probably break him in half without much effort, if she lived long enough to try. The walk back to his cabin was the type of nightmare that made strong men weep. She was unconscious, her body limp dead weight over his shoulders. The storm tried to kill them both. Wind tore at his cloak. Snow blinded him. His legs shook with effort. But his cabin appeared through the white like a miracle made of wood and desperation. He kicked the door open, stumbled inside, and dropped her as gently as exhaustion would allow near the fireplace. Then he collapsed against the wall and tried to remember how breathing worked. She didn't move, didn't make a sound, just lay there like a corpse made of green stone. Cormac had experience with hypothermia. You didn't live alone in the northern wastes without learning how to not die from cold. He'd saved himself twice. Saved a lost traveler once. Never saved an orc before, but he figured the principles were probably the same. Strip the wet clothes, wrap in blankets, warm slowly. Too fast and you could stop the heart. Keep them dry. Keep them breathing. Her armor came off in pieces, buckles and straps that his frozen fingers fumbled with. Underneath, she wore simple cloth wrappings that were soaked through. He replaced them with his spare blankets. All 3 of them. Which meant he'd be cold tonight, but she'd be less dead. And that seemed like a fair trade. For hours nothing happened. She didn't wake, didn't move. Just lay there breathing. Slow, shallow breaths that barely lifted the blankets. Cormac added wood to the fire, heated water, made weak broth from the rabbit he'd caught 2 days ago. Waited. Somewhere around midnight, she made a sound. A low groan that wasn't quite pain, but wasn't quite consciousness either. Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. Easy, he said, though he wasn't sure why. She couldn't hear him. You're safe. You're not dead yet. That's something. Her skin was still cold to the touch, but not corpse cold anymore. That was progress. He tucked the blankets tighter and added more wood to the fire. By dawn, He dozed off, sitting against the wall, his head tilted at an angle that promised his neck would hurt for days. He woke to the sound of movement, fast movement. When he opened his eyes, she was awake, and she had his axe, and she was pointing it at him with the kind of competence that suggested she knew exactly how to use it. Her eyes were yellow. He hadn't known that. Yellow like a wolf's eyes, bright and sharp and currently filled with enough suspicion to kill a lesser man just from the look. "Where am I?" Her voice was rough, like she'd been screaming for hours, or not speaking for days. Maybe both. "What did you do?" Cormac raised his hands slowly, very slowly. "You were dying in the ice. I brought you here. This is my cabin. You're safe. Safe." She said the word like it was a foreign concept. A human tells an orc she's safe. That's funny. The axe didn't lower. "What do you want?" "Want?" He blinked. "I want you to not split my skull open with my own axe. That'd be nice." "Why did you save me?" "Because you were dying." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have." They stared at each other. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm had gentled to a steady snowfall, still enough to kill, but quieter about it. Finally, she lowered the axe. Slightly. "You're either very brave or very stupid. I've been told it's usually the second one." She looked around the cabin. One room, barely large enough for a bed, a table, and the fireplace. The walls were rough-cut logs chinked with mud and moss. The table had one chair. The bed was a pile of furs in the corner. There were no decorations, no luxuries. This was survival, not living. "You're poor," she said. Not an insult, just an observation. Very observant. "You must be some kind of genius." Something that might have been amusement flickered across her face. Maybe. It was hard to tell with orcs. "What's your name, human?" "Cormac." "What's yours?" There was a pause. Brief, but noticeable. "Vexa." "Vexa." He nodded. "All right, are you going to kill me, Vexa? Because if you are, I'd appreciate knowing now. I'd like to write a note for old Hildy explaining where my firewood is stored." "Who is old Hildy?" "My neighbor. She lives 2 miles that way." He jerked his head toward the east. "She brings bread sometimes, talks too much. Nice woman." Vex's eyes narrowed. "You have a neighbor who knows you're here, who might come looking for you." "She might, though probably not during the storm. She's old, not suicidal." Another pause. Then Vexa set the axe down, not out of reach but not actively threatening anymore. She swayed slightly, caught herself. "How long was I in the ice?" "Don't know." "How long do you remember being there?" "Too long." She sat down heavily on the floor, still wrapped in his blankets. "I was traveling. Alone. The storm caught me. The ice broke beneath me." Her jaw tightened. "Stupid mistake. Everyone makes them. I made one last night bringing you here. Why do you call it a mistake?" "Because orcs and humans don't exactly have a history of helping each other. Someone finds out I sheltered you, I'll probably be run out of town. If I'm lucky. Then why do it? Already told you. You were dying." "That's still not an answer that makes sense." Cormac shrugged. "Then I guess I'm just stupid. Like I said." She studied him for a long moment, yellow eyes taking in everything, his worn clothes, his calloused hands, the way he didn't quite meet her gaze because looking an orc in the eyes felt like challenging a predator. He wasn't challenging anyone, he was just tired. "You're afraid of me," she said, terrified. "You're about twice my size and could probably rip my arms off." "I could." "I know, but I won't." "That's good to hear." Another flicker of something that might have been humor. "You're strange, Cormac. I've been told that too." She pulled the blankets tighter around herself. Despite being an orc, despite the muscles and the predatory grace, she looked tired, bone-deep tired, the kind that didn't come from one night in the ice. "I need to rest, more rest. Then I'll leave. You can barely sit up. I'll manage." "Sure, and when you collapse halfway through the woods and freeze to death again, I'll feel terrible. Just stay. Few days. Until the storm passes and you're stronger." "Why would you want me to stay?" "Because my mother would haunt me if I let someone die because I was too stubborn to be inconvenient for a few days." Vex's expression softened slightly. "Your mother is dead. 5 years now. I'm sorry. She lived well. Died angry at the world, which is how she liked it." He stood, joints popping. "I'm going to make broth. You're going to drink it. Then you're going to sleep. We'll figure out the rest later. You're bossy for someone so terrified. Fear makes people do weird things." He had one bowl. One wooden bowl that was old enough to remember when his father was alive, cracked down the middle and held together with tree resin that had hardened over years. It was ugly, utilitarian, the kind of thing a poor man owned because he couldn't afford to replace it. He filled it with broth, weak, barely more than hot water with the memory of meat in it, and handed it to her. Vexa took it like it was made of gold, looked at it for a long moment. "This is all you have, isn't it?" "One bowl. I don't usually have guests. You're giving me your only bowl. I can drink from the pot. It's fine." She lifted it to her lips, drank slowly, closed her eyes. "This is terrible broth. I never claimed to be a cook. It's the best thing I've tasted in weeks. Now I know you're delirious." She smiled. Actually smiled. It changed her entire face, made her look less like a predator and more like a person. Just a person who happened to be green and muscular and capable of probably bench-pressing his cabin. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saving me, for the broth, for not leaving me in the ice. You're welcome, for all of it." She finished the broth, handed him back the bowl. Their fingers touched briefly. Hers were still cold. Then she lay back down, pulled the blankets up to her chin, and closed her eyes. Within minutes, she was asleep. Cormac sat by the fire and wondered what exactly he'd just gotten himself into. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of wind and snow and cold that made survival feel like a full-time occupation. Cormac kept the fire burning, kept water heated, kept checking that Vexa was still breathing. She slept most of the first 2 days. When she was awake, they talked, carefully, like two people walking on ice that might crack any moment. She asked about his life. He asked about hers. They both lied in ways that were obvious but polite. He said he'd always lived alone. She said she was just a warrior traveling north. He said he liked the quiet. She said she liked being alone. Neither statement was entirely true, but neither pushed for more. By the 3rd day, she was strong enough to move around the cabin. She was tall, had to duck slightly to avoid the rafters. Her movements were careful, controlled, the way someone moved when they were used to being dangerous. "Your cabin is very small," she observed. "It's cozy. It's tiny. I prefer efficient." She almost smiled. "You're poor. We've established this. Why? Because lumber doesn't pay well. Because I live alone. Because I'm not very good at making money. Pick whichever reason you like best." She looked at him seriously. "Being poor isn't shameful. I know, but people treat it like it is. People are stupid." Also true. She walked to the window, a small opening covered with oiled cloth that let in light but kept out wind. Looked out at the storm. "I should leave when this ends. Probably. But I don't want to." It was the first truly honest thing either of them had said in 3 days. Cormac stood next to her. Not too close, just present. "Then stay, for a while. Until you want to leave. Why would you allow that?" "Because I've spent 5 years talking to myself and old Hildy. You're significantly better conversation than both." She laughed. Actually laughed. A sound that was rough and unused but genuine. "You're either the kindest human I've met or the most foolish. I'm voting for foolish. I think—" She paused. "I think kind." They stood there, watching the storm together. Two people who should have been enemies, sharing a moment that felt like something else entirely. Something without a name yet. "Cormac? Yeah? Thank you for letting me stay." "You're welcome, Vexa." The storm broke on the 4th day. The sun emerged like it had forgotten it existed. Bright, harsh, making the snow glitter like someone had thrown diamonds across the entire world. Beautiful in the way that killing things can be beautiful. Vexa should have left. She didn't. Days became a week became 2. They fell into a routine that felt natural despite being impossible. He'd chop wood in the morning. She'd watch from the door, claiming her muscles were still weak. He'd hunt in the afternoon. She'd stay behind, saying she needed more rest. They'd share meals in the evening. One bowl passed between them because he still only had one bowl. They talked more. Real talks. Not the careful dancing around truth they'd done at first. She told him about growing up in the mountains, about learning to fight before learning to read, about cold that made the northern wastes look gentle, about a culture that valued strength above all else, where weakness meant death and sentiment was considered a liability. He told her about his mother, about learning to survive alone, about winters so quiet he'd talk to trees just to hear a voice, about a culture that feared orcs so completely that children were taught not to speak their names. "We tell stories about your people," he said one night. "Monster stories, things to scare children into behaving. We tell similar stories about yours, weak, treacherous things that swarm like insects and die easily. Complimentary. We're not known for our diplomacy. I've noticed." She smiled. "You smile more than any human I've encountered. You've encountered humans. In battle, mostly. They didn't smile much. Mostly screamed. That's fair. There were moments when the reality of what they were doing hit him. An orc and a human sharing space, sharing food, sharing something that felt dangerously like friendship. It was insane. It was impossible. It was happening anyway. One afternoon, he came back from checking his traps to find her holding the wooden bowl. Just holding it, turning it over in her large hands. "This bowl," she said. "It's very old. Older than me, was my father's. And you've never replaced it? Can't afford to. And it works fine. It's cracked. So am I. We get along." She looked up at him. "Where I come from, a queen eats from plates made of hammered gold, drinks from cups carved from dragon bone. Every meal is served on something worth more than most humans see in their lifetime." Sounds exhausting. It is. She set the bowl down gently. "This bowl is the most honest thing I've seen in years. It's cracked because it's used. It's ugly because it's real. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not. It's just a bowl, Vexa." "No, it's not." He didn't understand. Not then. The truth came on a Tuesday, not because Tuesdays are particularly truthful, but because that's when Durgath arrived. Cormac heard them before he saw them. Heavy footfalls, multiple people moving through the woods with purpose. He looked at Vexa. She'd gone completely still, her entire body tense like prey that knew the predator was close. "Vexa, I need to tell you something. Now. Now." But there wasn't time. The door shook with a pounding that made the hinges rattle. A voice, deep, commanding, orcish, called out something in a language Cormac didn't speak. Vexa closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had changed. Her posture straightened, her expression hardened. She looked like what she was, someone powerful choosing to be gentle. She opened the door. 3 orcs stood outside, all warriors, all armed, all looking at Vexa like she was the most important thing in the world. The largest one, scarred, battle-worn, with eyes that had seen too much death, dropped to one knee immediately. The other 2 followed. "My queen," he said in rough common. "We found you." Queen. The word hit Cormac like a physical blow. Vexa, Queen Vexira of the Iron Peak clans, ruler of the Northern Territories, leader of thousands, looked at him with something in her yellow eyes that might have been regret. "I can explain," she said. "You're a queen." "Yes." "The queen." "Yes." "And you told me you were just a warrior." "I did." The large orc, Durgath Cormac would learn later, stood. His hand rested on his weapon. "This human. Did he hurt you? Imprison you?" "No." "Then why are you here? In this place?" He looked at the cabin with barely concealed disgust. "Because he saved my life. Because I was dying and he brought me here and kept me alive." Vexira's voice carried weight now. Command. The voice of someone used to being obeyed. "Because he showed me kindness when he had every reason not to." Kindness. Durgath said the word like it was spoiled meat. From a human. "Yes. My queen, we must return. Your absence has caused complications. The clans are restless. There are questions about succession, about leadership. How long was I gone?" 27 days. Cormac did the math. Nearly a month. A month of a queen missing, and no one knew where she was. A month of potential chaos in the orc territories. A month of her being here in his tiny cabin, sharing his cracked bowl and lying about who she was. "I see." Vexira turned to Cormac. "Can we speak? Alone?" Durgath tensed. "My queen." "Alone, Durgath." It wasn't a request. The 3 warriors retreated to a distance that was probably still within earshot, but pretended not to be. Vexira and Cormac stood in the doorway of his tiny cabin, the cabin that suddenly felt even smaller knowing that a queen had been sleeping on his floor. "I'm sorry," she said, "for lying." "Why did you?" "Because I wanted—" She paused. "I wanted to be just Vexa. Not Queen Vexira. Not the leader of clans. Not the symbol. Just someone. I haven't been just someone in so long I'd forgotten what it felt like." "You could have told me. Would you have treated me the same? Spoken to me the same? Fed me from your only bowl if you'd known I was a queen?" He wanted to say yes. He couldn't. Probably not. Exactly. She looked at her warriors, then back at him. "I have to go. You understand that?" "I do. But I don't want to." "I know." They stood there, a poor woodcutter and a queen, separated by a gap wider than species, wider than culture, wider than anything should be able to cross. Except they had crossed it. Somehow, impossibly, they had. "That bowl," she said suddenly. "The cracked one. Can I take it?" "What?" "I want to take it with me. As a reminder." "A reminder of what? Poverty? Bad broth?" "A reminder that the most valuable things in life aren't made of gold. That the truest kindness comes from those who have the least to give. that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is offer help when every instinct says not to. She reached out, took his hand. Hers was still cold, but stronger than it had been weeks ago. "You saved my life, Cormac. Not because you wanted something. Not because you knew who I was, but because it was the right thing to do. That's rarer than you think, especially for someone like me." "Someone like you?" "Someone who usually only sees people when they want something." Durgath cleared his throat, a sound like rocks grinding. "My queen, we should move. The longer we delay, the more complicated matters become." She squeezed Cormac's hand once, then let go. Walked to the table, picked up the bowl, old, cracked, ugly, honest, tucked it carefully into a pouch at her belt. "I'll remember this," she said. "I'll remember you. Will I see you again?" "I don't know. I hope so." She walked to where her warriors waited. They arranged themselves around her. Protection, ceremony, the physical manifestation of her returning to her real life. She looked back once. Cormac raised his hand in farewell. Then they were gone, leaving tracks in the snow that would be filled by nightfall. He went back into his cabin. It felt emptier than it had before she'd arrived. The fire still burned. The furs were still piled in the corner, but something essential was missing. He sat at his table, realized he didn't have a bowl anymore, laughed, a sound that was slightly broken. Old Hildy came by 3 days later with bread and questions. "You've been quiet," she said, settling into his only chair like she owned it. "Quieter than usual, I mean. And you're usually very quiet. Just thinking." "About what?" "About how strange life is. That's very philosophical for you." "I'm feeling philosophical." She studied him with eyes that had seen 70 winters and knew how to read people like books. Something happened. Nothing happened. Something definitely happened. He didn't answer. Some stories weren't meant to be shared. Some moments were too fragile for words. Old Hildy left eventually, still suspicious but accepting his silence. Cormac went back to his life, chopped wood, set traps, survived the winter. But sometimes, late at night, he'd look at the space where the bowl used to be and wonder what a queen was doing with a piece of cracked wood that was worth nothing to anyone except 2 people who'd shared it. 2 months passed. Winter edged toward spring, that tentative time when snow started melting, and everyone pretended that warm weather was coming soon, even though it clearly wasn't. Cormac was checking his eastern traps when he saw the figure, orc, lone, moving through the trees with purpose. He reached for his axe, reflex more than threat, then stopped. It was Mazrock, one of the younger warriors who'd come with Durgath. He carried something wrapped in cloth. "Human Cormac," he said, using the title like it was an actual name. "Just Cormac is fine. What are you doing here?" "The Queen sent me." He held out the wrapped bundle. "She wanted you to have this." Cormac took it carefully, unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a bowl, not wooden this time, carved from a single piece of white stone, smooth and perfect, with orcish symbols etched around the rim. It was beautiful. It was probably worth more than his entire cabin. And tucked inside the bowl, wrapped carefully, was his old cracked wooden bowl, returned. There was a note, short, in common, written with the careful precision of someone who didn't use the language often. "One bowl for what you've lost. One bowl for what you gave me. Both are valuable. Both are honest. Don't forget." No signature. Didn't need one. Mazrock shifted his weight. "She speaks of you sometimes, in council meetings. When the elders push too hard for traditional ways, she mentions a human who helped an enemy because it was right. It makes them—" He searched for the word. "Uncomfortable." "Good. You changed something, Cormac. Maybe something important." He nodded once, formal, respectful. "I should go. But she wanted you to know she remembers. Tell her I remember too." Mazrock smiled, a quick flash of tusks, then vanished into the trees as quietly as he'd arrived. Cormac stood there holding 2 bowls. One stone, one wood, one valuable, one worthless, both meaning exactly the same thing. He went back to his cabin, set both bowls on the table, looked at them for a long time. Then he made soup, still terrible soup, he had no illusions about his cooking, and ate it from the wooden bowl. The cracked one, the honest one. The stone bowl he put on the shelf above the fireplace, where it caught the light and reminded him that sometimes the impossible happened. Sometimes enemies became friends. Sometimes queens and poor men shared moments that changed things in ways that rippled outward like cracks in ice. That night, for the first time in months, he didn't feel quite so alone. Spring came eventually, the way it always did, reluctant but inevitable. Snow melted into mud. Trees remembered how to grow leaves. The world thawed. Cormac went about his life, chopped wood, set traps, talked to old Hildy when she brought her inevitable bread and questions. But sometimes he'd look north toward the mountains where the orc clans lived and wonder, did she still have the wooden bowl? Did she remember the terrible broth and the tiny cabin and the 3 weeks of impossible friendship? Did she know she'd changed him as much as he'd apparently changed her? He'd never find out the full answer to those questions. That's not how life worked. You saved someone from the ice. They left. You kept living. That was the deal. But some changes didn't need grand reunions or dramatic revelations. Some changes were quiet, slow, like water wearing away stone, impossible to see day by day, but undeniable over time. In the Orc territories, a queen made decisions that baffled her council, chose mercy over tradition, spoke of seeing enemies as people, kept a cracked wooden bowl in her chambers despite having plates of gold. In the northern wastes, a woodcutter learned that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely, that kindness didn't require logic, that sometimes the right choice was the impossible one. Both of them were changed. Neither of them was the same person they'd been before the storm. And somewhere between the human lands and the orc territories, the ice that had nearly killed her began to melt. Slowly, imperceptibly, but melting nonetheless. Years later, old Hildy would tell stories about the winter a strange woman stayed in Cormac's cabin. She'd describe the tracks she'd seen, too large to be human. She'd mention how quiet Cormac had been afterward, like someone keeping a secret that was too important to share. The young people would laugh, call it fantasy, say the old woman was senile. But Cormac would smile his quiet smile and say nothing, because some truths didn't need defending. Some stories were real, whether anyone believed them or not, and some bowls, cracked, humble, honest, were worth more than all the gold in all the kingdoms combined. He learned that from a queen. She learned it from a poor man who'd chosen kindness over survival, compassion over safety, and humanity over hatred. In the end, that was the only lesson that ever really mattered. The bravest warriors aren't the ones who fight. They're the ones who choose to save their enemies, knowing it might destroy them. And sometimes, the most powerful thing a queen can do is remember what it felt like to be human, even if she never was. If you enjoyed this story of impossible kindness and unlikely friendship, please hit that like button and subscribe for more fantasy tales that prove love and compassion know no boundaries, not of species, not of war, and not of prejudice. Comment below. What would you do if you found your enemy freezing in the ice? Would you save them? Watch my next video where another impossible story unfolds.